So, what's your ideology? Well, it's your accepted beliefs about how the way the world works. One part is how you see the nature of man. Are we naturally mean or are we naturally kind? Another is your interpretation of the past. Do you see it as the good old days? What about your vision of the future? Is it going to be a futuristic utopia or a dark Armageddon filled with war? Your ideology also looks at what you believe should be the role of government. Should we have a role or should we be controlled? In a nutshell, it's what influences our decisions. It's what you believe to be true. So there's things that influence what we do, what your ideology will be. Those influences on your ideology include culture, language, media, your relationship to the land and the environment, your gender, spirituality, religion. Does this list sound familiar? They should. We discussed in Social 10 as the influence of your ideology relating to globalization. It also relates to the list you are given in Social 20 for the ideological support of nationalism. Don't forget, your family can also play a major role in your ideology because they're the ones that expose you to a lot of these influences. We're going to be talking about ideologies for the rest of the semester, and we usually talk about them in terms of spectrums. That's because we often identify someone's ideology by comparing them to the beliefs of others. All ideologies are on a continuum because some people are a little more to the right, some people are a little more to the left. So when we talk about ideologies, those on the left wing, they want more government intervention in your life. That's because they want to encourage cooperation and economic equality. It can go as extreme as those radical revolutionaries who were willing to use violence in order to create a society based on equality. But then we move closer to the middle and we have those democratic socialists who want to see greater equality, but not at the expense of human rights. Those just left of center are considered modern liberals. They love the ideas of freedom, but they also see the need for some government control in order to make sure everyone has equal opportunities. There's a really great emphasis on the liberal idea of freedom requiring government protection of rights. For example, the legalization of same-sex marriage. Okay, now for the right wing. If you're on the right, you want everyone to be treated equally by giving individual rights and freedoms, but that doesn't include economic equality. This individualist ideology believes competition between two individuals or companies is the best way for society to succeed. So as we move away from the middle of the spectrum, there's going to be less support for government involvement. For example, less support for government-funded healthcare or unemployment insurance. This is known as classical liberalism because the ideas emerged a few hundred years ago. The supporters of this ideology are more traditional or conservative, and they turn away from liberal ideas of freedom of choice. So neoconservatives would be opposed to the legalization of same-sex marriage. If you go all the way to the extreme, you're going to pass by the fascists, who have government control to help the elite achieve individual success, to the reactionaries, who want to return to a traditional society that could be seen as extreme. This group is willing to use violence to enforce their traditional ideas, like the Taliban did in Afghanistan in the 1990s. I got a couple more things to point out to you about the spectrum. You need to be aware of when you're discussing economics, which relates to money and resources, and when you're focused on politics, which relates to the power being held by the people or an elite group, because there's terms that are specific to each. While a socialist ideology can be both political and economic, we're usually referring to economics when we use the term. For example, a socialist program like universal health care. The opposing economics term would be capitalism, which is always an economic term. For example, owning a private business. As well, when we're trying to define a political system, democracy, which gives the power to the people, is actually straddling the middle zone, while dictatorships, which puts power in the hands of the elite, can actually exist on both the right and left-hand sides of the spectrum. That's why a lot of protesters will look really foolish if they say the prime minister is a fascist communist. That doesn't make sense. It's two different sides of the political spectrum. So avoid talking about capitalism if you're supposed to be discussing political control, or talking about democracy if you're supposed to be discussing economic factors, unless you're confident you've actually clearly linked them in a way that makes sense. And finally, remember, individuals, groups, nation states, they all have aspects of one ideology while supporting an ideology that could be on the opposite side of the spectrum. That's why it is a spectrum. If you look at all their beliefs and actions, do they fit more to the right, to the left, or in the middle?